The great chamber on Nexus Prime buzzed with angry voices as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for what would become the most important meeting in galactic history. Commander Jake Sullivan sat quietly in the human section, watching as alien species after alien species stood up to speak against his people. The tall reptilian Krex delegate slammed his clawed hand on the speaking platform, while his translator device turned his hisses into angry words about human interference. The bird-like Zephyrians fluffed their colorful feathers in agitation as they complained about human arrogance. Even the peaceful ethereals, beings made of living gas who rarely spoke in council meetings, had sent representatives to voice their concerns. Jake had been coming to these meetings for 15 years and had never seen anything like this. The humans had always been welcome before, even praised for their help in solving problems across the galaxy. Now it seemed like every species had decided that humans were the real problem. He looked over at Dr. Lisa Morgan, Earth's top alien expert, who was organizing her data files with shaking hands. She had prepared for weeks to show how human help had prevented wars and saved lives. But the mood in the room made it clear that facts would not matter today. Ambassador Carl Peterson, a gray-haired man who had spent his entire career building friendships with alien species, looked tired and sad as he listened to speaker after speaker demand that humans leave galactic space. The accusations were always the same. Humans thought they knew better than everyone else. Humans forced their ideas on other species. Humans had disrupted the natural way things worked in the galaxy for too long. Carl had heard these complaints before in private conversations, but he never imagined they would lead to this moment. Admiral Susan Clark, the highest-ranking human military officer in galactic space, sat with perfect posture and a calm expression that revealed nothing of what she was thinking. She had commanded fleets that protected alien worlds from pirates and invaders. She had negotiated ceasefires between warring species and coordinated disaster relief efforts on dozens of planets. Now those same species were calling her presence an act of aggression against their independence. The Krex ambassador, General Krex Nor, spoke with particular venom about how humans had prevented his people from expanding into territories that rightfully belonged to them. He conveniently forgot to mention that those territories were inhabited by peaceful farming communities that would have been enslaved or killed in a Krex invasion. The Zephyrian Council leader Vextar nodded in agreement as he spoke about human cultural imperialism and how human ideas about democracy and individual rights were destroying traditional ways of life across the galaxy. Dr. Lisa Morgan finally got her chance to speak when the morning session ended. She walked to the central platform with her arms full of data tablets and holographic projectors. Her voice was steady and professional as she began to present the evidence of human contributions to galactic peace and prosperity. She showed statistics about prevented wars, charts showing reduced poverty on worlds where humans had shared technology, and medical data proving that human doctors had saved millions of alien lives from diseases and disasters. The alien delegates listened in hostile silence. When she finished her presentation with a plea for continued cooperation, the chamber erupted in angry voices. The insectoid hive representative, Queen Mother Zaxth, clicked her mandibles dismissively and declared that humans were trying to make themselves seem important by taking credit for things that would have happened anyway. The gaseous ethereals, speaking through their artificial voice boxes, claimed that human technology was unnatural and harmful to the spiritual balance of the universe. Ambassador Carl Peterson made one last attempt to save the relationship between humans and the rest of the galaxy. He stood slowly, his age showing in every movement, and spoke about the friendships he had built over decades of diplomatic service. He reminded the delegates of times when human ships had rushed to their aid during natural disasters, when human scientists had solved problems that seemed impossible, when human peacekeepers had stood between their children and those who would harm them. His words were met with uncomfortable shifting and averted eyes, but no change in the hostile mood. The vote was called in the afternoon. One by one, every non-human species voted to demand that humans withdraw from all galactic territories and end all contact with alien civilizations. The final tally was crushing. 47 species voted for human expulsion, 0 voted against, and 0 abstained. The humans were not allowed to vote on their own fate. The chamber fell silent as everyone waited for the human response. Many aliens expected anger, threats, or desperate bargaining. Some feared that the powerful human military might refuse to accept the decision. Admiral Susan Clark stood up slowly and walked to the central platform where she looked out at the sea of alien faces that had just rejected everything her people had tried to do for the galaxy. Her voice was calm and clear when she spoke. The human delegation accepts the will of the Galactic Council. We understand that our presence is no longer welcome, and we will respect your decision. All human personnel will withdraw from galactic space within 6 months. We will cease all aid operations, close all research stations, and end all military cooperation agreements. We wish you peace and prosperity in your future endeavors. The aliens sat in stunned silence. They had expected a fight, not this gracious acceptance of their demands. Some began to feel the first stirrings of doubt about what they had just done. Admiral Clark continued speaking in the same calm tone. We want to make it clear that this withdrawal is permanent. Once we leave, we will not return unless specifically invited by a unanimous vote of the Galactic Council. We respect your sovereignty and your right to determine your own future without human interference. As the human delegation gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the chamber for the last time, Ambassador Carl Peterson turned back to address the assembly one final time. His voice was filled with sadness but no anger as he said, "We came to this galaxy hoping to find friends and partners in building a better future for all sentient life. Perhaps we misunderstood what you wanted from us. We hope that history will judge our intentions more kindly than you have today. Farewell." The humans walked out of the chamber in dignified silence, leaving behind decades of work and friendship. The alien delegates sat in their seats, many beginning to wonder if they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history, but pride and political pressure prevented any of them from speaking up. As the chamber slowly emptied and the great experiment in human-alien cooperation came to an end. The withdrawal began 3 days after the vote. Captain Ryan Torres stood in the medical bay of Research Station Echo, watching Dr. Amanda Foster pack up equipment that had taken 5 years to set up. The station orbited Kepler 442b, home to the insectoid hive species, and for the past 3 years, it had been humanity's primary research facility for studying the plague that was slowly killing millions of hive citizens. Dr. Foster's team had been close to a breakthrough, perhaps only months away from finding a cure, but now all their work would have to stop. Dr. Foster moved between the research stations with tears in her eyes, carefully shutting down experiments that represented years of careful study. The protein synthesis chambers that had been analyzing hive genetic material went dark one by one. The quantum computers that had been modeling possible treatments were wiped clean and prepared for transport back to human space. Each piece of equipment represented not just advanced technology, but hope for an entire species that was dying from a disease they could not understand or cure. Queen Mother Zacht had personally voted for human expulsion from the galaxy, declaring that her people could solve their own problems without human interference. Now she watched from her palace windows as the human medical station prepared to leave orbit around her world. Her advisors had told her that the plague was a natural part of hive evolution, and that accepting human help was a sign of weakness. But as she watched the lights go out in the station that had been working to save her people, she felt something she had never experienced before. Doubt. On the industrial world of Titan 7, engineer Bobby Chen supervised the dismantling of the atmospheric processors that had made the planet habitable for the ethereal species. The ethereals were beings of living gas who needed very specific atmospheric conditions to survive, and their homeworld had been destroyed in a stellar disaster 2 centuries earlier. Human engineers had spent decades building the complex machinery needed to create an artificial atmosphere that could support ethereal life. The atmospheric processors were marvels of human engineering, using quantum-level controls to maintain the perfect balance of gases and energy fields that the ethereals needed to live. Bobby had helped design many of the systems himself, and he knew that no other species in the galaxy understood the science well enough to maintain them. The ethereals had demanded that humans take their unnatural technology with them when they left, not understanding that without these machines their new world would become uninhabitable within months. Consciousness Node, Whisper of Stars, the ethereal leader who had voted for human expulsion, floated near the main processing facility and watched the humans carefully disconnect each component. The ethereals believed that technology should work in harmony with natural forces, and they had always been uncomfortable with the complex human machines that kept their world alive. They assumed that once the humans left, They could replace the processors with simpler, more natural systems. Bobby tried to explain how the atmospheric balance worked, but the ethereals dismissed his warnings as human arrogance. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Martinez was withdrawing human peacekeeping forces from the border between Krex and Zephyrian territories. For 22 years, human soldiers had maintained monitoring stations along the disputed boundary, preventing incidents between the two warlike species from escalating into full-scale conflict. The early warning systems that humans had installed could detect military buildups days before they became dangerous, and human translators had prevented countless misunderstandings from turning into shooting wars. General Krexnor and council leader Fextar had both complained that human peacekeepers were preventing their species from settling territorial disputes in traditional ways. They wanted to handle their disagreements through strength and conquest rather than negotiation and compromise. Now they were getting their wish as human soldiers packed up their equipment and prepared to leave the border undefended for the first time in over 2 decades. As the monitoring stations went offline one by one, both Krex and Zephyrian military commanders felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. They were eager to test their strength against their ancient enemies without human interference, but they had grown used to the early warnings and communication systems that prevented surprise attacks. Without human translators and mediators, even routine border patrols became dangerous as neither side could communicate effectively with the other. On Earth, President Nancy Williams addressed the planet in a historic speech that was broadcast to human colonies throughout their space. She spoke from the steps of the Global Parliament building in Geneva, with representatives from every human world standing behind her. Her voice was steady and dignified as she explained the decision to honor the galaxy's demand for human withdrawal. For 50 years, she said, humanity has worked alongside our galactic neighbors to build a better future for all sentient life. We have shared our technology, offered our assistance, and stood ready to help whenever and wherever we were needed. Today, the galaxy has told us that our help is no longer wanted. We respect that decision and we will honor it completely. President Williams went on to explain that the withdrawal would be conducted with dignity and respect for the wishes of other species. Human personnel would return to human space in an orderly fashion, taking with them all the technology and resources they had provided to alien worlds. No human colonies or facilities would be abandoned to alien species, and no human technology would be left behind for others to use. The president's most important announcement came at the end of her speech. We go not in anger, but in sadness, for what might have been. Humanity will focus on our own development and exploration within our own space. We will not seek contact with other species unless they specifically request it. The galaxy has chosen independence over cooperation, and we will respect that choice. The withdrawal took exactly 5 months and 3 weeks to complete. Human transport ships moved constantly between alien space and human territory, carrying millions of personnel and countless tons of equipment back home. The evacuation was the largest logistical operation in galactic history, requiring precise coordination to ensure that no humans were left behind, and no human technology remained in alien hands. Captain Helen Rodriguez commanded the last human ship to leave alien space, a massive transport carrying the final group of diplomatic personnel and their families. As her ship crossed the boundary into human territory, automated systems throughout the galaxy began shutting down the vast network of communication relays, navigation beacons, and emergency response systems that humans had built and maintained for decades. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in 50 years, the galaxy's various species were truly alone, cut off from the human network that had connected their worlds and facilitated trade, communication, and cooperation. Many alien leaders celebrated this new independence, believing that they had finally freed themselves from human domination. They had no idea that they had actually just destroyed the foundation that their entire civilization depended on. The last human message sent through the galactic communication network was brief and formal. Withdrawal complete. All human personnel have returned to human space. We wish you well in your independent future. Earth Central Command signing off. Then the network went dark, leaving 47 species to face their future without the quiet guardians who had protected them for so long. 1 year after the humans left, Queen Mother Zacht stood in her palace medical center watching her offspring die. The plague that human doctors had been fighting had returned with a vengeance, and now it was spreading faster than ever before. The hive's own medical experts, who had always claimed they understood their people's biology better than any alien species, were helpless against the evolved disease that was killing thousands of young hive citizens every day. Dr. Buzik, the hive's chief medical researcher, had tried everything he could think of to recreate the work that Dr. Amanda Foster's team had been doing on the human medical station. But the human research had been based on technology and scientific methods that were far more advanced than anything the hive possessed. The protein synthesis chambers that had seemed so simple when humans operated them turned out to require quantum-level precision that hive technology could not achieve. The disease was mutating faster than the hive medical teams could study it. Without the human genetic analysis equipment, they could not track how the plague was changing or predict what it would do next. Queen Mother Zakth had forbidden her people from asking humans for help, declaring that the hive would solve their own problems or die with dignity. Now, as she watched her children suffer and die, she began to wonder if dignity was worth more than life. On the border between Krex and Zephyrian space, the first shots of a new war were fired when a Krex patrol ship encountered a Zephyrian survey vessel near the disputed Omega Nebula. Without human translators to help them communicate, both crews assumed the worst about the other's intentions. The Krex captain, thinking the Zephyrians were planning an attack, opened fire first. The Zephyrian ship responded with its own weapons, and within hours both species were mobilizing their fleets for what would become the bloodiest conflict in galactic history. General Krexnor had dreamed of this moment for decades. Finally, his people could settle their territorial disputes through strength instead of endless negotiations with weak human mediators. He assembled the largest Krex battle fleet ever seen and prepared to crush the Zephyrian resistance once and for all. But without the early warning systems that humans had maintained, his forces moved blind through space, never knowing where enemy ships might be waiting in ambush. Council leader Vextar was equally eager to test Zephyrian military might against their ancient enemies. His species had always believed they were superior warriors, held back only by human interference in their conflicts. Now they would prove their worth in glorious battle, but the communication breakdowns that occurred, without human translation, services led to disaster after disaster as Zephyrian commanders misunderstood orders and attacked their own allies by mistake. The war spread quickly as both sides called on their traditional allies for support. The Insectoid Traders Alliance sided with the Zephyrians while the Mineral Consortium supported the Krex. Soon, half the galaxy was involved in a conflict that grew larger and more destructive each day. Space battles raged across multiple star systems, leaving debris fields that made trade routes impassable and stranded civilian ships in dangerous territory. On Titan VII, the atmospheric processors that humans had built began showing signs of serious malfunction. Consciousness node. Whisper of Stars had assigned the best ethereal engineers to study the human machines, but they quickly discovered that the technology was far more complex than they had imagined. The quantum atmospheric controls operated on principles that ethereal science had never encountered, using energy fields and particle manipulation techniques that seemed almost magical. The first sign of trouble came when the oxygen levels in the eastern continent began fluctuating wildly. Ethereal engineers tried to adjust the controls, but their modifications only made the problem worse. Within weeks, large areas of the planet were becoming uninhabitable, as the carefully balanced atmosphere began to collapse. Thousands of ethereals had to evacuate their homes and crowd into emergency shelters near the few remaining stable processing centers. Engineer Float on Winds, the ethereal expert who had been most critical of human technology, now found himself desperately trying to understand the machines he had once called unnatural. He studied the quantum field generators and atmospheric balance computers, but the science behind them was centuries ahead of anything his people had developed. Every attempt to repair or modify the processors led to new failures that threatened the lives of more ethereal citizens. The galactic trade networks that had connected worlds and enabled prosperity for decades began collapsing as the communication systems that humans had maintained went offline. Merchant ships that had relied on human navigation beacons found themselves lost in space, unable to plot safe courses through asteroid fields and stellar phenomena. Pirates and raiders who had been kept in check by human patrol fleets emerged from hiding to attack defenseless cargo vessels. Captain Click Click Harmony, An insectoid trader who had built a successful shipping business using human trade routes watched his fortune disappear as his cargo ships were attacked and looted by raiders who no longer feared human retaliation. The sophisticated scheduling and routing systems that humans had provided were gone, leaving merchants to navigate dangerous space with outdated star charts and unreliable communication equipment. The economic disruption spread throughout the galaxy as worlds that had depended on trade for essential supplies found themselves cut off from their partners. Food shortages appeared on industrial worlds that had specialized in manufacturing instead of agriculture. Medical emergencies went untreated on planets that had relied on human hospitals and research facilities. The complex web of interdependence that had made galactic civilization possible was unraveling without the human systems that had held it together. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council met in emergency session as reports of crisis poured in from across known space. Council leader Vextar tried to maintain order, as delegate after delegate reported new disasters in their home systems. The Hive representative pleaded for medical assistance as their plague spread unchecked. The ethereal delegate warned that their species faced extinction if their atmospheric processors could not be repaired. Military commanders from a dozen species demanded action to stop the spreading war and piracy, but the Council discovered that they had no way to coordinate a response to the multiple crises. The communication networks that had enabled them to share information and make joint decisions were gone. The human research databases that had contained solutions to countless problems were no longer accessible. The peacekeeping forces that had enforced council decisions were scattered and demoralized without human leadership and support. Ambassador Smoothstone, a rock-like being from the Silicon Collective, stood slowly in the council chamber and spoke words that many had been thinking, but none had dared to say. Perhaps we have made a terrible mistake. The humans were not our oppressors. They were the foundation that our entire civilization was built upon. Without them, we are falling apart. The chamber fell silent as the truth of those words sank in. For 50 years, the galaxy had taken human help for granted, assuming that peace and prosperity were natural states that would continue without effort. Now they were learning that civilization was fragile, and that the humans, who had seemed so annoying and interfering, had actually been the guardians who kept chaos at bay. Council leader Vexistar looked around the chamber at the frightened and confused faces of delegates whose worlds were burning while they sat helpless to stop it. For the first time since the vote to expel humanity, he began to wonder if pride and independence were worth the price they were all paying. But it was too late for second thoughts now, and the galaxy would have to face its future alone. 2 years after the humans left, Queen Mother Zaxth made a decision that would have been unthinkable before the plague began killing her people by the millions. She authorized a direct mission to human space, breaking the isolation that the Galactic Council had demanded and risking the anger of every other species in the galaxy. Prince Warrior Ziktal, her most trusted offspring, would lead a small diplomatic ship across the boundary into human territory to beg for medical assistance. The Hive had lost over 60% of their population to the mutated plague. Their greatest cities had become graveyards filled with the bodies of children who had died while their parents watched helplessly. Dr. Buzik had tried everything their science could offer, but the disease was too advanced and too aggressive for Hive medicine to handle. The protein chains that made up the plague had evolved into forms so complex that only human quantum analysis equipment could understand them. Prince Warrior Ziktal's ship reached the human border station after a journey through increasingly dangerous space. Pirates and raiders controlled much of the territory between Hive space and human borders, and several times the diplomatic vessel had to hide from ships that would have killed them for their cargo. When Captain Helen Rodriguez's patrol ship intercepted them at the boundary, the Hive delegation felt a mixture of hope and shame that they had never experienced before. Captain Rodriguez listened politely as Prince Warrior Ziktal explained the desperate situation facing his people. The Hive Prince offered everything his species possessed: rare minerals that could not be found anywhere else in the galaxy, territorial concessions that would give humans access to valuable star systems, and even military alliance against the Hive's traditional enemies. He spoke with tears streaming down his insectoid face as he described the death of his own children and the extinction that his species faced without human help. Captain Rodriguez's response was measured but firm. I understand the terrible situation your people are facing, and I feel deep sympathy for your losses. However, the Galactic Council made it very clear that human involvement in alien affairs was unwelcome interference. The vote was unanimous among your species and all others. We must respect that decision and your sovereignty as an independent people. The Hive delegation left empty-handed, their species' pride preventing them from publicly acknowledging their mistake and voting for human expulsion. Prince Warrior Ziktal returned home to watch more of his people die, knowing that help existed but that their own choices had made it impossible to obtain. Queen Mother Zacht received his report in silence, her compound eyes reflecting the weight of a decision that was destroying everything she had sworn to protect. The war between the Kreks and Zephyrians had spread across half the galaxy, drawing in dozens of species and creating refugee crises that overwhelmed every world that tried to help. General Krexnor's forces had won several major battles, but without the intelligence and coordination systems that humans had provided, his victories were costly and temporary. Zephyrian counterattacks repeatedly caught his forces by surprise, leading to disasters that claimed the lives of millions of soldiers on both sides. Council leader Vexitar's Zephyrian fleets were suffering equally heavy losses as the war spiraled out of control. The sophisticated battle coordination that human advisors had once provided was gone, replaced by confusion and miscommunication that led to friendly fire incidents and strategic blunders. Both sides were fighting with outdated tactics and unreliable information, turning what should have been quick, decisive conflicts into grinding wars of attrition. The economic damage from the war was destroying civilizations that were not even directly involved in the fighting. Trade routes that had carried essential supplies for decades were blocked by battles or controlled by pirates who demanded tribute from merchant ships. Worlds that had specialized in manufacturing found themselves without raw materials, while agricultural planets could not ship food to the industrial centers that needed it. On Titan 7, the atmospheric processors finally failed completely. Consciousness node. Whisper of Stars had to order the evacuation of the entire planet as the artificial atmosphere that sustained ethereal life began breaking down faster than anyone had thought possible. Emergency habitats were hastily constructed on nearby moons, but they could only support a fraction of the ethereal population. Thousands of ethereals died during the chaotic evacuation as their life support systems failed in the unstable atmosphere. The ethereal refugees faced an uncertain future on barren worlds that could barely sustain life. Their leaders had rejected human atmospheric engineering as unnatural, but now they discovered that no other species in the galaxy possessed the knowledge needed to create the complex environmental systems that ethereals required. Engineer Float on Wind spent his final days studying the broken human machines, trying desperately to understand technology that was centuries beyond his people's comprehension. The breaking point came when long-range sensors detected the approach of the Devourers, a hostile alien species from beyond the galactic rim. For 50 years, human deep space monitoring stations had tracked Devourer scout ships and provided early warning that kept the invaders at bay. The galaxy's military leaders had grown comfortable knowing that human technology could detect threats long before they became dangerous. But now that protection was gone, Admiral Grixton of the Core World's Defense Fleet received the first reports of Devourer ships entering galactic space with growing horror. The enemy fleet was massive, far larger than anything the individual species could handle alone. Worse, the Devourers had used the 2 years since human withdrawal to study galactic defenses and plan their attack. They struck with precision and coordination that caught the divided galaxy completely unprepared. The first worlds to fall were the outer colonies that had relied on human early warning systems to detect approaching threats. The Devourers swept through system after system, destroying everything in their path with weapons that seemed almost magical in their destructive power. Civilian populations fled in panic as their defenders were overwhelmed by an enemy that fought with tactics and technology that no one understood. Admiral Grixton tried to coordinate a galactic defense, but discovered that the military leaders who had grown accustomed to human tactical support were unable to work together effectively. Communication breakdowns led to missed opportunities and friendly fire incidents. Supply lines that had depended on human logistics systems collapsed under the pressure of wartime demands. The sophisticated battle planning that human advisors had once provided was replaced by confusion and improvisation that cost countless lives. The Devourer invasion revealed just how dependent the galaxy had become on human protection. The aliens who had demanded independence discovered that they were not capable of defending themselves against a serious external threat. Their individual militaries were strong enough to fight each other, but they lacked the coordination and advanced technology needed to face an enemy that had spent decades preparing for this moment. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council met an emergency session as reports of destruction poured in from across the galaxy. Half the delegates could not attend because their homeworlds were under attack or had already fallen to the Devourers. Those who remained faced the terrible reality that their proud independence had left them, defenseless against the greatest threat their civilization had ever faced. A council leader Vextar stood in the nearly empty chamber and spoke the words that everyone was thinking but few dared to say. We have destroyed ourselves through our own pride and foolishness. The humans were never our enemies. They were our protectors, and we drove them away because we were too arrogant to admit that we needed their help. Ambassador Smoothstone, his rock-like form showing stress fractures from the weight of his world's crisis, responded with bitter truth. The humans offered us partnership and we demanded independence. Now we have the independence we wanted and it is killing us. Perhaps it is time to swallow our pride and ask for forgiveness before there is nothing left of our civilization to save. The Council voted to send a desperate delegation to Earth, hoping that humanity would be willing to help the galaxy that had rejected them. But they all knew that they had no right to ask for assistance after demanding that humans leave them alone. Their only hope was that human compassion would prove stronger than human pride, and that the species they had wronged would be willing to save them from the consequences of their own mistakes. The alien delegation that arrived at Earth was a shadow of the proud assembly that had voted to expel humanity 2 years earlier. Council leader Vextar's colorful feathers were dull and broken from stress. Queen Mother Zacht moved slowly, her body weakened by grief for the millions of offspring she had lost to the plague. Consciousness node. Whisper of Stars flickered weakly in his containment suit, representing the scattered remnants of his dying species. Even Admiral Grixton, the military leader who had once boasted about galactic independence, looked defeated and desperate. Their ships had barely made it through space that was now controlled by pirates and raiders. The Devourer invasion had accelerated the collapse of galactic civilization, turning once safe trade routes into hunting grounds for criminals who preyed on defenseless travelers. The delegation's escort ships had been attacked twice during the journey to Earth, and only luck had allowed them to reach human space alive. President Nancy Williams received the delegation in the magnificent council chamber on Luna, a structure that had been built during the 2 years of human isolation. The aliens were stunned by what they saw as their ships approached the Earth system. Human space had thrived during their absence with new colonies, advanced technology, and a confidence that came from focusing on their own development instead of constantly responding to galactic crises. The Luna Council Chamber was a work of art and engineering that demonstrated how far human civilization had advanced. Crystal walls provided views of Earth and space, while holographic displays showed the bustling activity of human worlds that had grown and prospered in isolation. The aliens realized they were looking at a civilization that had not merely survived their rejection, but had flourished because of it. President Williams greeted the delegation with courtesy, but without warmth. She listened as each speaker presented their desperate pleas for assistance. Queen Mother Zacht described the plague that was wiping out her people, her voice breaking as she spoke of watching her children die. Consciousness node. Whisper of Stars explained how his species faced extinction as their artificial world collapsed without human atmospheric processors. Council leader Vextar admitted that the war his people had started was destroying everything they had built. Admiral Grixton's report on the Devourer invasion was the most sobering. The enemy had conquered a quarter of the galaxy and showed no signs of slowing down. Entire species had been wiped out or enslaved. Ancient civilizations that had existed for thousands of years had been reduced to scattered refugees hiding on remote worlds. The galaxy's disorganized military forces were no match for an enemy that had studied their weaknesses and planned their attack carefully. The aliens offered everything they could think of to convince humanity to help them. Rare resources, territorial concessions, military alliances, and even complete submission to human authority were put on the table. Queen Mother Zath knelt before President Williams and begged for mercy for her dying people. Council leader Vextar formally apologized for the vote that had expelled humanity and asked for forgiveness. Even proud Admiral Grixton admitted that human military leadership was needed to save what remained of galactic civilization. President Williams listened to all their pleas without interruption. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment before she began to speak. Her voice was calm and measured, without anger but also without the immediate promise of help that the aliens desperately hoped to hear. 2 years ago, she said, you told us that our help was unwelcome interference in your affairs. You voted unanimously to expel us from galactic space and demanded that we cease all contact with other species. You said that you wanted independence and the right to determine your own future without human involvement. Admiral Susan Clark stood and activated a holographic display that showed the scope of human contributions to galactic civilization. The presentation revealed the staggering extent of services that humans had provided freely for decades. Communication networks that had connected every world. Medical research that had saved countless lives. Peacekeeping operations that had prevented wars. Technological assistance that had enabled prosperity. And defense systems that had protected the galaxy from external threats. The aliens watched in growing horror as they realized how much they had taken for granted. The quantum communication relays that had seemed like simple technology were actually the result of centuries of human scientific advancement. The medical databases that had contained cures for countless diseases represented the work of thousands of human researchers. The early warning systems that had detected threats like the Devourers were based on sensor technology that no other species could build or maintain. Dr. Lisa Morgan, now the Director of Human Galactic Affairs, presented the philosophical principles that had guided human actions throughout their involvement in galactic civilization. We helped because we believed in the potential of all sentient life, she explained. We never sought recognition or reward because the success of galactic civilization was our reward. We shared our knowledge freely because we believed that a galaxy where all species could thrive was better than one, where only the strongest survived. The presentation continued with data about human development. During their 2 years of isolation, advanced technologies that had been developed without the constant need to respond to galactic emergencies, new colonies that had been established in unexplored regions of space, scientific breakthroughs that had been achieved when human researchers could focus on long-term projects instead of crisis response. President Williams resumed speaking when the presentation ended. We bore no ill will toward any of your species when we left. We understood that you saw our help as interference and our cooperation as control. We respected your right to independence even though we believed you were making a mistake. The moment of truth came when President Williams announced humanity's decision about returning to galactic affairs. We will help you, she said, and the aliens felt a surge of relief and gratitude, but not as we did before. The old system where humans provided everything while other species took credit for success and blamed us for failure is over forever. The Galactic Cooperation Accords that were signed over the following weeks established a new framework for human involvement in galactic affairs. The other species formally acknowledged human contributions and agreed to support human efforts instead of hindering them. Human assistance would be provided openly and credit would be given where it was due. Most importantly, any species that wanted human help would have to ask for it formally and accept the conditions that came with it. The return of human ships to galactic space brought immediate relief to the suffering civilizations. Dr. Amanda Foster and her medical team arrived at the Hive homeworld within days of the treaty signing. Using improved technology developed during their isolation, they created a cure for the plague that had killed so many Hive citizens. Queen Mother Zath watched her surviving offspring recover and swore that her people would never again reject the friends who had saved them. New atmospheric processors were installed on ethereal refugee worlds, using designs that were more advanced and reliable than the original systems. Consciousness Node Whisper of Stars led his people in creating a memorial to the ethereals who had died during the atmospheric collapse, including a promise that they would never again let pride override wisdom. Human military advisors worked with Admiral Grixton to coordinate a successful defense against the Devourer invasion. The combined galactic fleet, properly organized and equipped with human technology, was able to push back the invaders and secure the galaxy's borders. The war between the Kreks and Zephyrians ended when human mediators negotiated a peace treaty that addressed the root causes of their conflict. The galaxy that emerged from the crisis was different from the one that had existed before. Species that had once taken human help for granted now understood the value of cooperation and mutual respect. The communication networks that were rebuilt included safeguards to prevent the kind of misunderstandings that had led to the original vote for human expulsion. Children of different species grew up together on space stations where humans and aliens worked side by side as equals. Schools taught the history of the Great Withdrawal as a lesson about the importance of appreciating friends and allies. The memorial on Luna to the lives lost during humanity's absence served as a reminder that independence without cooperation was not strength, but weakness. President Williams's final words at the treaty signing ceremony became the motto for the new galactic civilization. True strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together. We are all stronger when we help each other reach for the stars. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and humanity had proven that sometimes the greatest demonstration of power is knowing when to walk away and when to return with forgiveness.